Hunters tied this pregnant mother bear in the forest. What this baby did put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. The morning light filtered through the dense canopy, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. Olivia Hartwell stood on the porch of her family's remote cabin, watching her 15-month-old daughter, Ellie, toddle around the small clearing. The child's laughter echoed through the trees as she chased a butterfly, her tiny hands reaching toward the fluttering wings. Olivia smiled, cherishing these peaceful moments away from city life. They had come to these woods seeking solace after months of stress, hoping the tranquility would heal their weary spirits. What Olivia didn't know was that deeper in the forest, a different scene was unfolding. 5 men moved with practiced stealth through the undergrowth, their camouflage blending with the foliage. These weren't ordinary hunters seeking game. They were after something far more valuable. Nathan Reed, the leader of the group, signaled for the others to stop as they reached a small gully. His weathered face tensed as he pointed to fresh tracks in the soft earth. "She's close," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "Remember, we need her alive." The men nodded, checking their equipment. Tranquilizer guns, heavy-duty ropes, and tracking devices, tools of their illegal trade. They weren't hunting for food or sport, they were poachers, capturing exotic animals for private collectors willing to pay fortunes for living trophies. Their target was a rare American black bear with unique markings, a bear that had eluded wildlife authorities for years but had recently been spotted in these parts. What they didn't expect was to find her in her current state. As they crested a small hill, they saw her, magnificent and terrifying, her black fur gleaming in patches of sunlight. The bear was enormous, her movements slow and deliberate. Nathan's eyes widened as he realized why. Her swollen belly revealed her condition, heavily pregnant and likely close to giving birth. "Damn," muttered Caleb, the youngest of the group. "She's carrying cubs." Nathan hesitated only briefly. "Doesn't change anything. In fact, it makes her more valuable. 2 for the price of 1. Before anyone could argue, the bear caught their scent. Her head snapped up, dark eyes locking onto the intruders. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, men and beast evaluating each other in tense silence. Then chaos erupted. The bear charged, surprisingly fast despite her condition. Nathan fired his tranquilizer, the dart finding its mark in her shoulder. The bear roared in pain and confusion, stumbling slightly as the sedative began to take effect, but it wasn't enough to bring her down completely. "More!" Nathan shouted, and another dart flew. The bear lunged forward again, swinging massive paws that could kill with a single blow. The men scattered, diving behind trees and rocks. Back at the cabin, Olivia heard the commotion, distant shouts and a sound that made her blood run cold, the enraged roar of a large animal. Her eyes darted to Ellie, who had stopped playing and was staring into the forest, her little face curious rather than frightened. "Ellie, come here," Olivia called, trying to keep her voice calm while her heart hammered in her chest. But Ellie, with a toddler's selective hearing, did not come. Instead, she took a wobbly step toward the forest edge, drawn by the unusual sounds. In the forest, the poachers had finally managed to subdue the bear. As the second tranquilizer took effect, she swayed on her feet, fighting the drowsiness overtaking her. Her eyes, still alert but increasingly unfocused, seemed to contain a mournful understanding of what was happening. With a final, weak growl, she collapsed onto her side, her massive chest heaving with labored breaths. "Quick, tie her up before she comes around," Nathan ordered, uncoiling the thick ropes from his pack. The men worked rapidly, binding the bear's legs together and securing her to a nearby tree. The tranquilizer wasn't strong enough to keep her unconscious for long. They'd used a lighter dose, fearing that too much might harm her cubs. "What if she gives birth while we're moving her?" asked Marco, the most experienced wildlife handler among them. Nathan shrugged. "Then we get extra for the cubs. Now stop talking and help me secure these ropes." The bear was beginning to stir already, the sedative wearing off faster than they'd anticipated. Her eyes opened, filled with a wild panic as she discovered she couldn't move. She thrashed against the ropes, her roars now tinged with desperation rather than rage. Unknown to the poachers at that very moment, little Ellie had wandered farther from the cabin than she'd ever gone before. Olivia, momentarily distracted by a phone call from her husband, hadn't noticed her daughter's absence until the line went dead. Panic seized her as she scanned the yard and found it empty. "Ellie!" she screamed, rushing toward the forest edge. "Ellie!" But Ellie was already deep among the trees, drawn by instinct and curiosity toward the bear's cries. The toddler didn't understand danger the way adults did. To her, the sounds weren't threatening. They were calls of distress, not unlike her own cries when she was hurt or frightened. The poachers froze as they heard branches snapping nearby. Expecting forest rangers or perhaps local hunters, they were stunned when a tiny figure emerged from behind a fallen log. Ellie stood there in her little blue overalls, wisps of blonde hair escaping from her ponytail, her wide eyes taking in the scene before her. "What the hell?" whispered Caleb, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. Nathan hissed a warning. "Don't even think about it. It's just a kid." The bear, sensing the men's distraction, renewed her struggles, the ropes cutting into her fur as she fought to free herself. Her eyes rolled wildly until they locked onto the small human child standing just feet away. Something changed in that moment. The bear's movements became less frantic, her gaze more focused. Ellie, oblivious to the danger, took another step forward. The forest had gone eerily silent, as if every creature held its breath to witness what would happen next. "Someone get that kid out of here," Nathan hissed, his voice tight with tension. But none of the men moved. They were transfixed by the scene unfolding before them. A tiny human approaching one of nature's most dangerous predators. The mother bear's eyes never left Ellie as the child moved closer. Her massive body still strained against the ropes, but there was something different in her movements now. Less panicked thrashing and more calculated effort. She let out a low, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl, but more like a warning. Marco, who had studied animal behavior before turning to poaching, watched in fascination. "She's not showing aggression toward the kid," he whispered. "It's almost like—" "Shut up," Nathan cut him off, his mind racing to salvage the situation. If there was a child here, parents couldn't be far behind. Their entire operation could be exposed. Ellie was now just 10 feet from the bear, babbling in her toddler language, pointing at the animal with chubby fingers. "Bah! Bah!" she repeated, perhaps trying to say bear, or simply expressing wonder at the creature before her. The bear's breathing had become more labored, her sides heaving with effort. A new kind of distress appeared in her eyes, one that Marco recognized immediately. "Nathan, I think she's going into labor," he said urgently. "The stress and the tranquilizers, they're triggering contractions." "Damn it," Nathan cursed, running a hand through his hair. "This complicates everything." Caleb shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should just leave her. This is getting too risky." Nathan shot him a venomous look. "Do you have any idea what this specimen is worth? Especially with cubs? We're not going anywhere." Meanwhile, Olivia was frantically searching the forest edge, calling Ellie's name with increasing desperation. She had called the local ranger station on her cell phone, but help would take at least 20 minutes to arrive. 20 minutes her daughter might not have if she encountered a wild animal or fell into one of the ravines that cut through these woods. Olivia forced herself to think rationally despite her panic. Ellie was drawn to animals. She always had been. If she'd wandered into the forest, she might have followed a squirrel or a bird. Listening carefully, Olivia heard distant voices, adult male voices. Relief flooded through her. Perhaps someone had found Ellie. But as she moved toward the sounds, that relief quickly turned to apprehension. Why would strangers be deep in these woods? Back at the scene, the bear suddenly let out a mournful bellow that echoed through the trees. Her body tensed as a contraction gripped her, and fresh blood appeared on her coat where the ropes cut into her flesh as she strained against them. Ellie stopped her approach, her little face crumpling in response to the bear's obvious distress. Then, to everyone's astonishment, she sat down on the forest floor and began to cry, not loudly as toddlers often do when hurt or frightened, but softly, sympathetically, as if sharing in the bear's pain. The poachers exchanged uncomfortable glances. This was beyond anything they had expected or prepared for. A child, crying for a suffering animal, was tugging at consciences they'd thought long buried. "We need to do something," Marco said quietly. "She's going to lose the cubs if we keep her restrained like this." Nathan's jaw clenched. The situation was spiraling out of his control. But before he could respond, another voice cut through the clearing. A woman's voice, breathless with fear and relief. "Ellie! Oh my God, Ellie!" Olivia burst into the clearing, freezing momentarily as she took in the scene. 5 armed men, her daughter sitting on the ground, and a massive black bear tied to a tree, obviously pregnant and in distress. Her maternal instincts overcame her shock as she rushed toward Ellie, scooping the child into her arms and backing away from both the bear and the men. "What are you doing to that animal?" she demanded, her voice shaking but fierce. Her eyes darted between the men, noting their equipment. Not standard hunting gear, but something more sinister. Nathan stepped forward, trying to appear calm and reasonable. "Ma'am, we're wildlife management. This bear is dangerous and needs to be relocated. You should take your daughter and go back to wherever you're staying." But Olivia wasn't fooled. She had worked with environmental groups in the city. She knew what proper wildlife management looked like. "Wildlife management doesn't use ropes that cut into an animal's flesh," she said, her voice gaining strength. "And they certainly don't handle a pregnant animal like this. I'm calling the authorities right now." She shifted Ellie to her hip and pulled out her phone, but Caleb moved quickly, snatching it from her hand. "I don't think so," he said, his previous discomfort replaced by a cold determination. "We can't have you doing that." Fear shot through Olivia as she realized the danger they were in. These weren't just poachers. They were desperate men with a lot to lose if caught. She held Ellie tighter, her mind racing for a way out of this situation. The bear roared again, a sound filled with such primal pain that everyone in the clearing flinched. Her body convulsed with another contraction, more powerful than the last. Marco moved toward her, his face troubled. "Nathan, we have to release her. She's going to die if we don't, and the cubs with her." "And then what?" Nathan snapped. "We just walk away from all this money because some kid and her mom showed up?" The tension in the clearing was palpable. A complex web of human greed, compassion, fear, and the raw, unstoppable force of nature, as the bear fought not just for her freedom but for the lives growing inside her. It was in this tense moment that another figure emerged from the trees, a tall man with a weathered face and steady eyes. He carried a rifle, but held it pointed at the ground. His appearance was so sudden and silent that even Nathan was startled. "I believe the lady asked what you're doing to that animal," the man said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority. "I'd like to hear the answer myself." The poachers exchanged glances, assessing this new threat. The stranger wore no uniform, but there was something in his bearing that suggested he knew these woods and the creatures in them far better than they did. "This doesn't concern you," Nathan said, trying to regain control of the situation. "Move along." The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. 5 men with tranquilizer guns and illegal snares, a tied-up pregnant bear about to give birth, and a frightened woman and child being threatened. "I'd say that concerns me quite a bit." He took a step forward, and despite being outnumbered, there was something in his presence that made the poachers shift uneasily. "My name is Daniel Hayes," he continued. "I've been tracking this bear for 3 seasons now. She's part of a conservation study." His eyes moved to the bear, assessing her condition with evident concern. "And right now, she needs help, or those cubs aren't going to make it." The bear bellowed again, her cry weaker this time. Her eyes, previously fierce and wild, were becoming glazed with exhaustion. Blood now soaked the ropes around her limbs, and a clear fluid had begun to seep onto the forest floor beneath her. Her water had broken. Little Ellie, still in her mother's arms, reached out toward the bear, tears streaming down her round cheeks. "Hurt," she said clearly, one of the few words in her limited vocabulary. "Hurt." The simple word seemed to hang in the air, cutting through the tension like a blade. Marco was the first to break, throwing down the rope he was holding. "I didn't sign up for this," he said, backing away. "Pregnant bears and children crying. This isn't what I do." Nathan glared at him, but doubt had crept into his own expression. The situation had escalated far beyond a simple capture and transport operation. Now there were witnesses, a conservation study that would definitely notice the bear's absence, and worst of all, the increasingly likely scenario that the bear would die before they could move her, leaving them with nothing but the consequences of their actions. Caleb and the other 2 poachers looked to Nathan, waiting for his decision. The balance was shifting, momentum turning against them. Nathan could feel his plan dissolving, replaced by a growing sense that they needed to cut their losses and disappear before things got worse. But before he could speak, Ellie squirmed in her mother's arms, breaking free with the surprising strength that toddlers sometimes possess. Before Olivia could catch her, the child had darted forward, moving with unexpected speed directly toward the struggling bear. "Ellie, no!" Olivia screamed, lunging after her daughter. Daniel raised his rifle instinctively, not to shoot, but ready to intervene somehow if the bear showed any aggression toward the child. The poachers froze, watching in horror as the tiny human approached the powerful predator. Time seemed to slow as Ellie reached the bear, her little hand extended fearlessly toward the animal's face. What happened next would be recounted for years to come in that small community, a moment that seemed to transcend the natural order of things. The mother bear, exhausted and in pain, lifted her massive head as Ellie approached. Every adult present held their breath, muscles tensed to intervene. But instead of aggression, the bear's eyes showed something unexpected: recognition, perhaps even understanding. As Ellie's tiny hand touched the bear's blood-matted fur, the animal let out a soft, huffing sound, so different from her previous roars of distress. "Don't move," Daniel whispered to everyone, his voice barely audible. "Just don't move." Olivia stood frozen, her heart hammering so violently she felt dizzy. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to snatch her child away from danger, but something in the bear's demeanor held her back. The connection forming between her daughter and this wild creature seemed almost sacred, impossible to interrupt without consequences she couldn't predict. Ellie patted the bear's nose gently, the way she would pet their neighbor's dog back in the city. "Oe," she said softly, her limited vocabulary somehow perfect for the moment. "Oe." The bear blinked slowly, her labored breathing continuing but her struggles ceasing. It was as if she recognized another young being's empathy, an offering of comfort that transcended species. Marco stepped forward cautiously. "I need to cut these ropes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's bleeding too much, and the cubs—" Nathan started to object, but the words died in his throat as he watched the bizarre tableau before him. The business of poaching suddenly seemed distant and unimportant compared to the primal drama of birth and the inexplicable bond between a toddler and a wild bear. "Do it," he finally said, his voice hollow with defeat. "Cut her loose." Marco pulled out his knife and approached carefully, speaking in low, soothing tones. "Easy, Mama, easy now. We're going to help you." He glanced at Daniel. "I worked at a wildlife sanctuary before this. I know what to do if she'll let me." Daniel nodded, still keeping his rifle ready but pointed away from the bear. "Move slow, no sudden movements." As Marco began carefully sawing through the ropes, Olivia found her voice. "Ellie, sweetie, come to Mommy now," she called softly, extending her hand. But Ellie remained where she was, her little hand still resting on the bear's muzzle, her eyes wide with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her 15 months. The bear huffed again, then suddenly tensed, her entire body rigid as another powerful contraction gripped her. "The first cub is coming," Marco announced, working faster on the ropes. "We need to give her space once she's free." Just as the last rope fell away, the bear let out a low groan that seemed to vibrate through the forest floor. With her newfound freedom, she might have attacked or fled, but instead, she simply rolled to a more comfortable position, her eyes never leaving Ellie's face. Then came a moment that none of them were prepared for. The bear extended one enormous paw, gently, so gently it barely disturbed the air, and touched Ellie's shoulder. Not to harm, not to push away, but almost like a gesture of gratitude. Caleb gasped. "Did you see that? What the hell did I just see?" Daniel's weathered face showed wonder and confusion in equal measure. In all his years tracking and studying wildlife, he had never witnessed anything like this interaction. "It's as if she knows." Olivia took advantage of the momentary calm to edge closer to her daughter. "Ellie, honey, the bear needs to rest now," she said, reaching for the child's hand. "She's going to have her babies." To everyone's relief, Ellie allowed herself to be guided a few steps back, though her eyes remained fixed on the bear. The massive animal watched them retreat, then focused inward as another contraction came. She groaned and began to lick frantically at her hindquarters. "It's happening," Marco said, backing away to give the bear space. "First cub is coming now." The forest seemed to hold its breath as the mother bear labored. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the humans watching in silent awe as one of nature's most intimate processes unfolded before them. Finally, with a grunt and a heave, the first tiny cub emerged, wet, blind, and impossibly small compared to its mother. The bear immediately began cleaning the cub with her tongue, her movements gentle despite her enormous size and previous distress. The little one squirmed and made tiny squeaking sounds that carried clearly in the hushed clearing. Ellie clapped her hands in delight. "Baby!" she exclaimed, one of her favorite words. "Baby!" The moment of wonder was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching and voices calling through the forest. The rangers Olivia had called earlier were finally arriving. Nathan and his remaining loyal poachers exchanged panicked looks. "We need to go, now," Nathan hissed, gathering his gear. "This whole operation is blown." Daniel stepped forward, blocking their path. "You're not going anywhere except with the authorities," he said firmly. "You've committed multiple federal offenses today." Nathan's hand moved toward the gun at his hip, his eyes calculating. "I'm not going to prison for this." But before the situation could escalate further, a new variable entered the equation. The mother bear, despite being in the middle of giving birth, raised her head and fixed Nathan with a stare so intense it seemed to pierce right through him. She let out a warning growl that made the hair on everyone's necks stand on end. The message was unmistakable. "Threaten these humans who freed me, who showed kindness to me and my cub, and you'll face consequences no man can survive." Nathan's hand fell away from his weapon as realization dawned on his face. There was no winning here, no escaping. The bear's unexpected protection of those who had shown her mercy was the final, startling twist in a day already filled with the impossible. As the rangers' voices grew closer, Caleb made a sudden decision. He stepped away from Nathan, throwing down his tranquilizer gun. "I'm done," he declared. "This isn't right, none of it ever was." The other poachers, sensing the shift, began to distance themselves from Nathan as well. The leader stood alone now, his grand plan in ruins, his team deserting him. Marco, who had been watching the bear with professional concern, suddenly pointed excitedly. "Look, second cub coming." Indeed, the mother bear was straining again, bringing another new life into the world even as human drama played out around her. This cub emerged more quickly than the first, a testament to the bear's strength despite her ordeal. Again, she cleaned and nuzzled her offspring, guiding it to nurse alongside its sibling. Olivia held Ellie close, both of them witnessing this miraculous event with wide eyes. "Life finds a way," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "Even in the darkest moments, life finds a way." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "These cubs might not have survived if your daughter hadn't wandered into the forest today," he said quietly. "Sometimes the most innocent among us teach the most powerful lessons." The rangers broke through the tree line then, 5 uniformed officers with serious expressions that quickly turned to astonishment as they took in the scene. A mother bear with newborn cubs, a toddler watching in wonder, a group of men with poaching equipment, and a lone conservationist standing guard over it all. "What in God's name happened here?" the lead ranger asked, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of the extraordinary tableau. Before anyone could answer, the bear let out a third, unexpected cry of pain. Marco, who had been counting contractions, looked surprised. "There's another cub," he announced. "Triplets. That's rare for black bears." All attention returned to the mother bear as she strained once more, bringing a third tiny life into the world. This cub was smaller than its siblings, and for a heart-stopping moment it lay motionless on the forest floor. The mother bear nudged it frantically, licking and prodding, but the tiny body remained still. A wave of sadness washed over the humans watching, especially Olivia, who unconsciously tightened her hold on Ellie. After everything the bear had endured, to lose one of her cubs seemed too cruel a twist of fate. Ellie, sensing the shift in mood, began to squirm in her mother's arms. "Down," she insisted. "Down." "No, baby, we need to stay back," Olivia whispered, but Ellie was determined, pushing against her mother's chest with surprising strength. What happened next would later be dismissed by scientists as coincidence, by skeptics as exaggeration, but for those present in that clearing, it would remain unshakable evidence of something greater at work in the world. Ellie broke free from her mother's grasp and, before anyone could stop her, toddled directly back to the bear and her cubs. The mother bear, still focused on her motionless third offspring, barely acknowledged the child's approach. Ellie knelt beside the tiny, wet bundle of fur and, with the innocent compassion only a child could offer, placed her small hand on the cub's back. "Wake up," she said clearly, patting the cub gently. "Wake up, baby." For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then, as if responding to some mysterious connection between innocence and new life, the third cub twitched. Its tiny chest expanded in a sudden gasp, and a high-pitched squeal emerged from its throat. The mother bear's head snapped up, her eyes wide with what could only be described as joyful surprise. She immediately began licking the revived cub with renewed vigor, helping it move toward her warmth and nourishment. The Rangers, the Poachers, Daniel, Olivia, they all stood in stunned silence, witnesses to something that defied easy explanation. Even the most hardened among them felt tears welling up, a response to the pure, unfiltered miracle they had just witnessed. "She saved it," Marco whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "That little girl saved the cub." Nathan, the last holdout against the wave of sentiment sweeping through the clearing, finally broke. His shoulders slumped, and he placed his weapons on the ground, raising his hands in surrender. "I'm done," he said quietly. "Take me in." As the Rangers moved to apprehend the Poachers, Olivia gently retrieved Ellie from beside the bear family. The mother bear watched them go, her eyes seemingly holding an intelligence and awareness that went beyond animal instinct. There was no aggression, no fear, only a shared understanding between 2 mothers, an acknowledgement of the bond their children had forged. Daniel approached Olivia and Ellie as the Rangers handcuffed the Poachers. "What your daughter did today," he began, then shook his head, unable to find adequate words. "I've been studying these animals for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like it. She has a gift." Olivia nodded, still processing everything that had happened. "She's always had a way with animals. Even as a baby, she could calm our cat when no one else could." She looked down at Ellie, who was watching the bear family with peaceful contentment. But this was something else entirely. The lead ranger joined them, his expression a mixture of awe and professional concern. "We'll need statements from both of you," he said, "and we'll have to monitor the bear and her cubs to make sure they're healthy after the stress they've endured. But I've got to say, in 30 years on this job, I've never seen a wild bear allow a human child to approach her newborns without showing aggression." He shook his head in wonder. "It's like she knew your daughter was trying to help." As the Rangers led the Poachers away, Olivia noticed that Marco kept looking back at the bear family, genuine concern etched on his face. Unlike the others, his remorse seemed to go beyond fear of punishment. "Wait," she called out impulsively. "That one, Marco, he tried to help in the end. He knew what to do when the bear was giving birth." The lead ranger, whose name badge identified him as Ranger Thomas Wilson, considered this for a moment. "Is that right?" he asked Marco directly. Marco nodded, his eyes downcast. "I worked at the Blue Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary for 6 years before—" He trailed off, unable to finish the confession of how he'd turned his knowledge of animals toward exploitation rather than protection. Ranger Wilson made a quick decision. "Cuff him separately. We might need his expertise if the mother or cubs develop complications." He turned to Daniel. "Can you stay with the bear for now? Our wildlife vet is an hour out, and I'd rather have eyes on them continuously." Daniel nodded solemnly. "Of course, I know this bear. She's part of a study I've been conducting on black bear populations in these mountains." He glanced at the remaining poachers being loaded into ranger vehicles. "If you don't mind, I'd like to understand how these men found her. She has a tracking collar, but the signal is encrypted and only accessible to authorized researchers." Nathan, overhearing this, looked up sharply. His face, previously a mask of defeated resignation, suddenly showed alarm. This reaction didn't go unnoticed by Ranger Wilson, whose eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Something you want to share, mister?" the ranger asked. "Reed, Nathan Reed," he answered automatically, then immediately looked as if he regretted providing his real name. "Mr. Reed seems eager to talk," Wilson observed. "We'll have a long conversation back at the station." He turned to Olivia and Ellie. "Ma'am, we'll need you to come in as well for a formal statement, but it can wait until tomorrow if you'd prefer to get your daughter home." Olivia nodded gratefully, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the crisis was fading, leaving her shaky and overwhelmed. "Thank you. We're staying at the Blue Pine cabin about half a mile east of here. My husband should be arriving there soon. He's been in town getting supplies." As she mentioned her husband, Olivia felt a fresh wave of anxiety. How would she explain all this to Michael, that their toddler had wandered into the forest and somehow formed a mystical bond with a wild bear? That Ellie had seemingly revived a stillborn cub through some inexplicable connection? It sounded impossible even to her, and she had witnessed it firsthand. Daniel stepped closer, speaking quietly so only Olivia could hear. "Mrs. Hartwell, what happened here today, it's exceptional, unprecedented. If you're willing, I'd like to discuss it further. I'm a wildlife biologist with the University of Virginia, and I've been studying animal-human interactions for decades. But this—" He gestured toward the bear, who was now nursing her 3 cubs contentedly, as if the trauma of the day had never happened. "This defies everything we understand about wild animal behavior." Olivia shifted Ellie in her arms, noticing that the child's eyes were growing heavy with exhaustion. "I don't know what to tell you, Dr. Hayes. Ellie has always had a way with animals, but nothing like this. It was almost as if they understood each other on some level we can't access," Daniel finished for her. He pulled a card from his pocket. "Please call me when you've had time to process all this. What we witnessed might be important, not just for science, but for how we think about our relationship with the natural world." Olivia tucked the card into her pocket, too overwhelmed to think about the broader implications of the day's events. All she wanted now was to get Ellie home safely and wait for Michael to return. As they prepared to leave, Marco called out from the ranger vehicle where he was being held. "Wait! The bear, you should name her." Olivia turned, surprised by the odd request. "Name her? She's a wild animal." Marco's eyes were earnest. "After what happened today, she deserves a name, for the records, for the study, for her story." Daniel considered this, then nodded slowly. "He's right in a way. We usually use alphanumeric codes for tracking, but given the unique circumstances—" Ranger Wilson shrugged. "It's not protocol, but I don't see the harm." All eyes turned to Ellie, who was fighting sleep but still watching the bear with fascination. Olivia bounced her gently. "Ellie, what should we call the mama bear?" Without hesitation, as if she'd been waiting for this question, Ellie pointed and said clearly, "Hope." A moment of silence followed, the simple name hanging in the air between them. It seemed perfect, for the bear who had survived against the odds, for the cubs who now had a future, for the mysterious connection they had all witnessed. "Hope it is," Daniel said softly, making a note in his field journal. As Olivia carried Ellie back through the forest toward their cabin, the events of the day replayed in her mind like scenes from a dream. Had she really seen what she thought she saw? Had her daughter truly connected with a wild bear in a way that defied explanation? And what did it mean for Ellie, for their family, for how they understood the world? The forest around them seemed different now, alive with possibilities she had never considered before. Every rustle of leaves, every bird call, every patch of sunlight filtering through the canopy felt like part of a language she was just beginning to hear. When they emerged from the tree line and saw their cabin in the distance, Olivia noticed a truck parked outside. Michael had returned. Relief flooded through her at the sight of her husband unloading groceries from the back, blissfully unaware of the extraordinary events that had transpired just a short distance away. How could she possibly explain it to him? Where would she even begin? As if sensing her thoughts, Ellie stirred in her arms. "Bear," she murmured sleepily. "Hope?" Olivia kissed her daughter's forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. Hope." When Michael saw them approaching, his face lit up with a smile that quickly turned to concern as he noticed Olivia's disheveled appearance and the intensity in her eyes. "What happened?" he asked, setting down the bags and rushing to meet them. "Are you okay? Is Ellie all right?" Olivia took a deep breath. "We're fine. We're both fine. But Michael, something happened in the forest today, something incredible." Inside the cabin, as Ellie napped exhausted on the couch, Olivia recounted the events to Michael, watching his expression shift from disbelief to amazement to concern. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "So, our daughter connected with a wild bear," he said finally, his voice careful, "and saved a cub's life." "I know how it sounds," Olivia responded, running her hands through her hair. "If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it either." Michael walked to the window, looking out at the forest that suddenly seemed much more mysterious than it had that morning. "And this biologist, Daniel, he wants to talk to us about it. He seemed to think it was significant. Scientifically, I mean." Michael turned back to her, his eyes serious. "And what do you think it means, Liv?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither of them fully understood. Olivia glanced at Ellie, sleeping peacefully, looking like any ordinary toddler. "I don't know," she admitted. "But whatever it is, I think it's just the beginning." 3 days later, the Hartwell family sat in their cabin's living room with Daniel Hayes and Dr. Elena Vasquez, a colleague of his who specialized in animal cognition. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation as they reviewed the preliminary findings from the examination of Hope and her cubs. "Physically, they're all doing remarkably well," Dr. Vasquez explained, her dark eyes bright with enthusiasm. "The cubs are healthy despite the difficult circumstances of their birth, and the mother, Hope, has recovered with no signs of infection or lasting trauma from the ropes." "What about the third cub?" Olivia asked, remembering the tiny, still body that had suddenly revived at Ellie's touch. "The one that appeared stillborn," Dr. Vasquez finished for her. "That's where things get interesting. We've named her Miracle, given the circumstances. She's smaller than her siblings, but her vital signs are strong. In fact, her brain activity shows some unusual patterns compared to typical black bear cubs." "Unusual how?" Michael asked, his arm protectively around Ellie, who was playing with building blocks on the floor, seemingly oblivious to the adult conversation. Daniel and Dr. Vasquez exchanged glances. "We're hesitant to speculate too much at this early stage," Daniel said carefully. "But her neural responses are highly atypical, particularly in the regions associated with environmental awareness and what we might call, for lack of a better term, empathic recognition." In simple terms, Dr. Vasquez added, seeing the confusion on the Hartwells' faces, it's as if this cub is unusually attuned to human presence. When our team approaches, she shows none of the stress markers we'd expect. In fact, her heart rate actually stabilizes. Michael leaned forward. And you think this has something to do with what happened with Ellie? With how she touched the cub? We can't say for certain, Daniel replied. Science doesn't have a framework for understanding what you described. But something extraordinary happened in that clearing, and we'd like to study it further, with your permission, of course. Olivia and Michael shared a look, their concerns reflected in each other's eyes. They had discussed this extensively over the past few days, weighing the potential benefits against their protective instincts as parents. What exactly would that entail? Olivia asked finally. Nothing invasive, Dr. Vasquez assured them quickly. We've established a research station near the den where Hope has settled with her cubs. We'd like to bring Ellie there, with you present at all times, of course, and observe any interactions. We'd measure physiological responses, record behaviors, document everything with scientific rigor. You want to see if Ellie can communicate with the bears again, Michael stated flatly, not quite a question. Daniel nodded. Essentially, yes, but only if it occurs naturally. We wouldn't force any interaction. Olivia watched Ellie playing contentedly, stack building blocks only to knock them down with delighted giggles. She seemed so normal, so typical, except for the extraordinary thing they had all witnessed. There's something else you should know, she said suddenly, a memory surfacing. When Ellie was 6 months old, we took her to the zoo. There was a gorilla there, a female who had recently lost her baby. She had been refusing food, staying in the back of her enclosure, showing all the signs of grief. But when we walked by with Ellie, something strange happened. Michael's eyes widened as he remembered. The gorilla came right up to the glass. She just sat there, staring at Ellie, and Ellie ... Ellie placed her hand on the glass, Olivia continued, and the gorilla matched it, palm to palm. They stayed like that for almost 5 minutes. The keeper said he'd never seen anything like it. The next day, the gorilla started eating again. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her scientific curiosity clearly piqued. And you didn't think to mention this earlier? Olivia shrugged helplessly. We thought it was a coincidence. A cute story to tell family and friends, nothing more. It wasn't until what happened with Hope that I started to wonder if maybe your daughter has a gift, Daniel finished, his voice soft with wonder. Just then, Ellie looked up from her blocks, her eyes finding her mother's. Bear, she said clearly. See Hope again? A chill ran through the room as all 4 adults stared at the toddler who had somehow followed their conversation, despite appearing absorbed in her play. That settles it for me, Michael said, breaking the silence. I think we need to understand what's happening here. For Ellie's sake, as much as for science. Olivia nodded slowly, both terrified and fascinated by the path opening before them. But we do this carefully. Ellie's safety comes first, always. Daniel's face broke into a relieved smile. Absolutely, we'll take every precaution. As they discussed the logistics of the research plan, none of them noticed Ellie return to her blocks, a small, knowing smile on her face as she built a structure that, had any of them been paying attention, bore a striking resemblance to a bear's den. The forest was alive with morning sounds as the small group made their way along the trail to the research station. Ellie rode on Michael's shoulders, pointing excitedly at birds and squirrels, occasionally calling out their names with her growing vocabulary. Olivia walked beside them, nervously checking and rechecking the backpack that contained Ellie's snacks, extra clothes, and favorite stuffed animal. Daniel led the way, occasionally stopping to point out interesting plants or animal signs, his enthusiasm for the natural world evident in every gesture. Behind them, Dr. Vasquez and her research assistant Jeremy carried equipment for recording and monitoring the day's observations. "Hope's den is just beyond that ridge," Daniel explained, gesturing ahead. "We've set up observation blinds about 50 yards away, close enough to document interactions but far enough not to disturb her routine." "How have the cubs been developing?" Olivia asked, still amazed that they were talking about wild bear cubs as if discussing the progress of children in a playgroup. "Remarkably well," Daniel replied. "Miracle, the third cub, has been hitting all her developmental milestones despite her rough start. In some ways, she's actually advancing faster than her siblings. It's fascinating to document." They crested the ridge, and Daniel pointed to a small clearing where several canvas blinds had been erected, each equipped with observation windows and what looked like sophisticated recording equipment. A team of researchers moved quietly between the stations, speaking in hushed tones and making notes on tablets. "Welcome to Project Hope," Daniel said with a quiet pride. "The first ever study of its kind, exploring interspecies empathy and communication between humans and wild bears." The research assistant, Jeremy, stepped forward. "We've prepared a special blind for your family," he explained. "It's the closest to the den but still completely safe. We've reinforced it with extra supports, and there's an emergency exit on the far side, just in case." Michael nodded appreciatively. "Safety first," he agreed, lifting Ellie down from his shoulders. She immediately grabbed his hand, bouncing slightly with excitement. "Bear, sea bear," she exclaimed, her voice carrying across the clearing. Several researchers looked up, smiling at her enthusiasm, but clearly nervous about the potential disruption to their careful protocols. Dr. Vasquez knelt down to Ellie's level. "Yes, sweetie, we're going to see the bears, but we need to be very quiet, okay? Just like playing hide and seek." Ellie's expression grew serious, and she placed a finger to her lips. "Shh," she demonstrated solemnly. "That's right, Doctor," Vasquez praised. "Very good." They made their way to the designated blind, settling in as Jeremy explained the monitoring equipment and the safety procedures. Through the observation window they could see a small clearing, and beyond it, the entrance to a cave where Hope had established her den. "She usually brings the cubs out around mid-morning," Daniel explained, checking his watch. "The sun hits that flat rock perfectly, and she lets them play while she keeps watch." Sure enough, about 20 minutes later, a movement at the cave entrance caught their attention. Hope emerged, her powerful body moving with surprising grace as she surveyed the clearing. Satisfied that no threats were present, she made a soft huffing sound, and 3 tiny cubs tumbled out after her, their movements still clumsy but gaining coordination each day. "The largest one is Thunder," Daniel whispered, pointing to a cub with a distinctive white patch on his chest. "Next is Storm. She's the middle cub, and the smallest one." "Miracle," Olivia breathed, her eyes fixed on the tiny cub that her daughter had somehow connected with. Ellie pressed against the observation window, her small hands splayed on the glass, her eyes wide with wonder. "Baby bears?" she whispered, following the instruction to stay quiet. Hope guided her cubs to the flat rock Daniel had mentioned, where they basked in the morning sun while she kept vigilant watch. Occasionally, she would groom one of them with her tongue or gently reposition a cub that wandered too close to the edge. "Their behavior is completely normal," Dr. Vasquez noted, making entries on her tablet. "Hope is showing excellent maternal care, and the cubs' play behaviors are developing on schedule." They watched in peaceful silence for nearly an hour, the researchers recording every interaction, every movement. Ellie remained surprisingly still, her focus unwavering as she observed the bear family's morning routine. Then something unexpected happened. Miracle, the smallest cub, suddenly stopped playing with her siblings. She sat up on her haunches, her tiny nose twitching as she sniffed the air. Then, to everyone's amazement, she turned and looked directly at their blind, directly at where Ellie stood watching. "That's impossible," Jeremy whispered. "She can't possibly see through the blind. The material is specifically designed to prevent—" His words died away as Miracle began moving toward them, her steps purposeful despite her unsteady gait. Hope noticed immediately and huffed a warning call, but for once the cub ignored her mother's instruction. She continued her determined approach toward the blind. Hope quickly gathered her other cubs, herding them back toward the den entrance, then turned to follow Miracle. Her body language showed concern, but, remarkably, not aggression. "This is unprecedented," Daniel breathed, frantically adjusting the recording equipment. "The cub is approaching a human structure voluntarily, and the mother is allowing it." Inside the blind, Ellie had begun to bounce with excitement. "Miracle! Miracle coming!" she exclaimed, forgetting the instruction to stay quiet. At the sound of Ellie's voice, both Miracle and Hope froze. The cub's head tilted in a gesture that seemed almost human in its curiosity. Hope took a step forward, placing herself between the blind and her cub, protective, but still not showing signs of aggression. "She recognizes Ellie's voice," Dr. Vasquez whispered, her scientific detachment momentarily forgotten in her awe. How is that possible after only one brief encounter? Ellie turned to her parents, her face alight with a joy that seemed to radiate from within. "I go see Miracle," she stated, not a question but a simple declaration of intent. Michael immediately tightened his hold on her hand. "Absolutely not. We agreed to observe only, Ellie. It's not safe." Ellie's lower lip trembled, not in the way of a typical toddler tantrum brewing, but with a genuine disappointment that seemed too mature for her young face. "Safe," she insisted. "Hope knows." Olivia and Michael exchanged worried glances. This was exactly the scenario they had feared. Ellie wanting to repeat the dangerous proximity to wild bears, believing in a connection that might have been a one-time anomaly. Daniel cleared his throat awkwardly. "We did discuss the possibility of closer interaction, but only under the most controlled circumstances. This is outside our established protocol." Outside, Miracle had sat down about 20 feet from the blind, her small form silhouetted against the forest backdrop. Hope remained nearby, watchful but calm, occasionally making soft vocalizations that seemed directed at her cub. "They're waiting," Jeremy said, his voice hushed with disbelief. "It's almost like they're expecting something." A heavy silence fell over the blind as the adults grappled with the extraordinary situation developing before them. Scientific curiosity warred with parental protection, wonder with caution, possibility with risk. Ellie looked up at her father, her eyes filled with a wisdom and certainty that seemed impossible in one so young. "Please, Daddy," she said softly. "Important." Something in her voice, in the simple gravity of her words, made Michael hesitate. He looked to Olivia, a thousand unspoken questions in his eyes. Olivia felt torn between her instinct to protect her child and a growing sense that they were witnessing something that transcended normal understanding, something important not just for science but for Ellie herself. "What if," she began hesitantly, "what if we compromise? What if we all go out together? Michael and I will hold Ellie's hands. Daniel and Dr. Vasquez can be ready with tranquilizers if needed. We stay close to the blind. At the first sign of trouble, we retreat immediately." Dr. Vasquez looked conflicted. From a research perspective, this would be invaluable data. From a safety perspective, ... She shook her head. Bears are wild animals. No matter how docile Hope has seemed, maternal protection is a powerful instinct. But that's just it, Daniel interjected, his eyes bright with realization. Her maternal instinct didn't trigger aggression when Ellie approached before. In fact, it seemed to create some kind of recognition, a shared understanding. Jeremy checked the monitoring equipment nervously. The other research teams have noticed the bear's unusual behavior. They're asking if we've changed the protocol. Outside, Miracle had moved a few steps closer to the blind, her tiny form now clearly visible through the observation window. Hope remained where she was, alert but calm. "I think," Daniel said slowly, "that we're being invited to continue what began in that clearing 3 days ago. And I think, if we refuse, we might miss an opportunity to witness something truly extraordinary." A tense silence filled the blind as every adult weighed the impossible decision before them. Scientific discovery against child safety, wonder against caution, the unprecedented against the established. Olivia knelt beside Ellie, looking into her daughter's eyes. "Ellie, sweetheart, how do you know Miracle wants to see you? How do you know it's safe?" Ellie placed her small palm against her mother's cheek, a gesture of reassurance that seemed impossibly mature. "Hope says okay," she answered simply, as if explaining something obvious. "Miracle is my friend." Michael ran a hand through his hair, the conflict evident on his face. "This goes against every parental instinct I have," he admitted. "But there's something happening here that feels important." Dr. Vasquez was rapidly typing notes into her tablet. "If we proceed, we need strict protocols. Jeremy, alert the other blinds that we're initiating controlled contact. Have tranquilizer teams on standby, but absolutely no firing unless I give the signal." She looked at the Hartwells. "And if we do this, the very instant I say retreat, everyone moves back to the blind without hesitation or argument. Agreed?" Olivia and Michael exchanged a long look. 17 years of marriage allowing for a complex conversation without words. Finally, they both nodded. "Agreed," Michael said firmly. "One sign of aggression from Hope, and we're done." Daniel was already preparing the recording equipment. "We'll document everything from multiple angles. This will be a landmark moment in interspecies communication studies, regardless of the outcome." Jeremy spoke quietly into his radio, and they could see researchers in the other blinds shifting position, adjusting equipment, preparing for whatever was about to unfold. The tension in the air was palpable, a mixture of scientific excitement and primal fear. "Ready?" Dr. Vasquez asked, her hand on the blind's door. "Ready," the Hartwells confirmed together, each taking one of Ellie's hands. The door opened slowly, deliberately, minimizing sudden movements. The morning air rushed in, carrying the complex scents of the forest: pine resin, damp earth, wildflowers, and the musky odor of wild animals. Ellie inhaled deeply, a smile of pure joy spreading across her face. As they emerged from the blind, Hope immediately rose to her full height, an imposing sight that made Michael instinctively step in front of Ellie. But the bear showed no signs of aggression. No teeth, no growling, no aggressive posturing. She simply watched, her intelligent eyes tracking their movements with careful attention. Miracle, seeing the humans emerge, let out an excited squeak and took a few more wobbly steps forward, before Hope huffed softly, a sound that seemed to give permission while also urging caution. "Incredible," Daniel whispered, filming every second. "The mother is actively allowing her cub to approach while maintaining a safe distance herself. This contradicts everything we understand about bear behavior. They stopped about 15 feet from Miracle, a distance that felt both too close and too far, a no man's land between human safety and wild connection. The tiny cub sat on her haunches, head tilted in apparent curiosity. Ellie tugged at her parents' hands, clearly wanting to move closer. "Please," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the cub. Dr. Vasquez nodded slightly. 5 more feet, no more. And move very slowly. With excruciating care, they took a few steps forward as a unit, Michael and Olivia maintaining their firm grip on Ellie's hands. Hope watched their approach, her massive head following their movement, but she remained stationary, neither retreating nor advancing. At 10 feet away, they stopped again. Now they could see Miracle clearly, her dark eyes bright with what seemed impossible to describe as anything other than recognition, her tiny nose twitching as she caught Ellie's scent. And then, to everyone's astonishment, the cub rose on unsteady legs and began moving toward them with determined, if wobbly, steps. "Hold position, Doctor," Vasquez instructed softly. "Let the cub come to us." In her parents' grip, Ellie was practically vibrating with excitement, but she remained admirably still, seeming to understand the delicacy of the moment. Hope made another soft huffing sound but didn't move to stop her cub's approach. 5 feet away, Miracle paused, sitting back on her haunches again. 4 feet. 3. The adults held their breath as the wild bear cub came within arm's reach of them, close enough that they could see the individual hairs of her dark coat, the pink of her tongue as she panted slightly from the exertion. What happened next would be replayed on news broadcasts around the world, would be studied in universities, would spark debates among scientists and philosophers about the nature of consciousness and connection. Miracle rose again and took the final steps directly to Ellie. Then, in a gesture that defied all wild animal behavior, the cub pressed her head against Ellie's leg in what could only be described as affection. Olivia's free hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Michael's grip on Ellie's other hand tightened reflexively. Behind them, they could hear the rapid clicking of cameras, the hushed exclamations of the research team. "May I?" Ellie asked, looking up at her parents with pleading eyes. After a moment's hesitation, they loosened their grip enough for Ellie to slowly, carefully lower herself to a sitting position on the forest floor. Miracle immediately clambered into her lap as naturally as a pet kitten, making soft chirping sounds of contentment. "She's purring," Daniel whispered incredulously. "Bears don't purr." But the sound was unmistakable, a rhythmic rumbling that emanated from the cub's chest as Ellie gently stroked her fur. Hope watched from her position, alert but calm, showing no signs of distress at her cub's intimate contact with a human child. "The implications are staggering," Dr. Vasquez murmured, her scientific detachment momentarily forgotten in the face of the miraculous scene before her. "If this represents a genuine form of interspecies communication—" She trailed off as the scene took another unexpected turn. Hope slowly began to approach, her massive form moving with deliberate care. Michael tensed, ready to snatch Ellie away at the first sign of danger, but Dr. Vasquez placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Wait," she whispered, "just wait. She's not showing any aggression. Let's see what happens." Hope stopped about 6 feet away, her eyes moving from her cub to Ellie and back again. Then, in a gesture that seemed to mirror Miracle's earlier action, she lowered her massive head and huffed softly. "She's acknowledging the connection," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I believe she's giving her approval." For several minutes, they remained in this extraordinary tableau. A toddler sitting on the forest floor with a bear cub in her lap, watched over by both human and ursine parents in a momentary truce that defied natural law. Eventually, Hope made a different sound, a low grumbling call that seemed to have meaning for Miracle. The cub looked up at Ellie's face, pressed her small nose against the child's cheek in what looked remarkably like a kiss, then reluctantly climbed out of her lap and went to join her mother. As the bears retreated to a safe distance, the humans slowly backed toward the blind, Olivia carrying Ellie now, all of them moving with the dreamlike quality of people who had witnessed something beyond their understanding. Once safely inside, the scientific team erupted into excited chatter, analyzing what they had seen, comparing notes, rewatching the video footage. But the Hartwell family sat in silence, processing the profound experience in their own way. "She told me things," Ellie said suddenly, her voice small but clear. The room fell silent as all attention turned to the toddler. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Olivia asked. "What did Miracle tell you?" Ellie frowned, struggling to articulate concepts that were perhaps beyond her limited vocabulary. "Not words," she tried to explain. "Feelings, pictures." She tapped her chest. "In here." Dr. Vasquez knelt beside her. "Can you tell us what feelings or pictures she shared, Ellie?" The child nodded seriously. She was sleeping, dark, no breath. Her face lit up. Then I touched her. Light came, warm. She pointed to her own chest again. She remembers. Daniel and Dr. Vasquez exchanged stunned glances. "She's describing what happened when she touched the stillborn cub," Daniel whispered. "She's saying Miracle remembers being revived." "That's not possible," Jeremy interjected. "The cub was oxygen deprived. There's no way it could have formed memories during that state." "And yet," Dr. Vasquez said slowly, "we just witnessed a wild bear cub seek out specific human contact and display affection behaviors that have never been documented in the species." She looked at Ellie with newfound wonder. Perhaps we need to expand our understanding of what's possible. Michael, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "What exactly are we dealing with here? Is my daughter speaking with animals? Because I've got to tell you, that's not something they cover in parenting books." A tense laugh rippled through the room, breaking some of the intensity of the moment. "I don't think it's quite that simple," Dr. Vasquez replied thoughtfully. "What we may be observing is a form of empathetic connection that most humans lose as they mature. Children, especially very young ones, haven't fully developed the cognitive filters that separate them from the natural world. They experience reality more directly, more openly." Daniel nodded in agreement. "There are stories in many cultures about children who can speak with animals, or understand the language of birds. Maybe these aren't just fairy tales. Maybe they're observations of a capacity that exists in early development but is typically lost as we age." Olivia stroked Ellie's hair absently, her mind racing. "So, what does this mean for Ellie? For her future? Is this something she'll outgrow?" No one had an answer to that, and the silence stretched uncomfortably until Jeremy called from his monitoring station. "Doctor, Hayes, Dr. Vasquez, you need to see this." They gathered around his computer screen, which showed various physiological metrics being recorded from the research team, the Hartwells, and, remarkably, estimates of the bear's vital signs captured by remote sensing technology. "I've synchronized the timestamps," Jeremy explained, pointing to several graphs. "Look what happened when Ellie and Miracle made physical contact." The data showed an astonishing pattern. Heartbeats that had synchronized, brainwave patterns that had aligned, even thermal signatures that had harmonized. Human and bear, momentarily functioning in physiological unity. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Vasquez breathed. We're not just seeing behavioral mimicry or conditioned response. We're seeing biological synchronization between different species. Daniel's face was alight with scientific excitement. This could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness itself. If Ellie can form this kind of connection, it suggests that consciousness might be more transferable, more fluid than we've ever imagined. Michael rubbed his temples, overwhelmed. That's our daughter you're talking about, not a research subject. What does this mean for her life? How do we protect her? His question hung in the air, a sobering reminder of the human stakes in this scientific breakthrough. Ellie, seemingly oblivious to the adult's concerns, had returned to playing with the small stuffed bear she'd brought along, mimicking the sounds and movements she'd observed in Hope and Miracle. Dr. Vasquez straightened up, her professional demeanor returning. You're absolutely right, Mr. Hartwell. While the scientific implications are enormous, Ellie's well-being must remain our primary concern. I suggest we proceed with extreme caution, perhaps scaling back direct interactions until we better understand what's happening. Olivia nodded gratefully, but then a new thought occurred to her. What about the poachers? The ones who were arrested. Have they said anything about why they were specifically targeting Hope? Daniel's expression darkened. That's another concerning development. The lead poacher, Nathan Reed, finally started talking yesterday. He claims he was hired by someone, he doesn't know who, specifically to capture this bear and her cubs alive. He was told this particular bear was a special somehow, valuable to private collectors. But how would they know? Michael asked, puzzled. If what Ellie can do is so unprecedented, how would poachers know to target Hope specifically? Daniel and Dr. Vasquez exchanged uneasy glances. That's what worries us, Daniel admitted. It suggests someone else might have observed unusual behavior from Hope before, someone with the resources to hire professional poachers and the motivation to keep the bear's unusual qualities private. Are you saying Ellie might be in danger? Olivia asked sharply, instinctively moving closer to her daughter. Not necessarily, Doctor, Vasquez said quickly, but it does raise questions about who else might be interested in this phenomenon. She hesitated before continuing. There's something else you should know. The ranger station received a call this morning from a private research foundation called the Thornhill Institute. They're requesting access to Hope and her cubs for what they called complementary research purposes. Never heard of them, Michael said. Few people have, Daniel replied grimly. They're very private, very well funded, and rumored to be involved in some ethically questionable wildlife research. The request was denied, of course, but the timing is concerning. The peaceful wonder of the morning's interaction was quickly giving way to a more complex reality, one where their daughter's extraordinary gift might attract unwanted attention from people with unknown motives. I think we should go, Michael said firmly. Back to the cabin, at least for today. We need time to process all this and consider what's best for Ellie. No one argued. The data had been collected, the historic interaction documented. There would be time for further research, for careful analysis and peer review. But for now, the Hartwell family needed space to come to terms with their new reality. As they prepared to leave, Ellie looked up from her stuffed bear with a frown of concentration. Bad people coming, she said suddenly, her voice matter-of-fact, looking for Miracle. Every adult in the room froze, staring at the toddler who had spoken with such certainty. Ellie, what do you mean? Olivia asked carefully. What bad people? The child returned to playing with her toy, seemingly untroubled by her own proclamation. Men in dark clothes want to take Miracle away. She looked up again, her eyes wide and serious. Need to hide them, hidden place. Daniel moved quickly to the observation window, scanning the forest with sudden urgency. Nothing seemed amiss. The clearing was peaceful. Hope and her cubs now resting in the dappled sunlight near their den. "How does she know this?" Michael whispered, his face pale with concern. Is she seeing the future now too?" Dr. Vasquez shook her head. "I doubt it's anything supernatural. But if she does have an unusual empathetic connection with these bears, she might be sensing their distress on some level we don't understand." She turned to Jeremy. "Increase security around the perimeter. Alert the rangers that we may have unauthorized visitors in the area." Jeremy nodded and reached for his radio. But before he could make the call, a distant sound caught everyone's attention. The unmistakable whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of helicopter rotors approaching. Daniel's face hardened. "We don't have authorized air traffic today." Dr. Vasquez moved quickly to her equipment. "Everyone stay inside. Jeremy, initiate lockdown protocol for all research stations." She turned to the Hartwells, her expression grave. "I'm afraid your daughter may be right, and if she is, we need to move Hope and her cubs immediately." Outside, Hope had already heard the approaching helicopter. She was on her feet, gathering her cubs with urgent huffs and nudges, herding them toward the den entrance. But Miracle lingered, looking back toward the research blind as if waiting for something, or someone. Inside, Ellie slipped from her mother's momentarily loosened grip and pressed herself against the observation window. "Miracle afraid," she said, distress evident in her voice. "Hope afraid." The sound of the helicopter grew louder, and through the trees they caught a glimpse of a sleek black aircraft with no identifying markings. It was flying low, too low for legal wildlife observation, clearly searching for something. Or someone. "This isn't a coincidence," Daniel said grimly. "Someone knows about what happened this morning. Someone was watching us." Dr. Vasquez was already on her satellite phone, speaking rapidly to what seemed to be some kind of authority. "We have unauthorized aircraft in a protected wildlife zone. Yes, I understand the jurisdiction issues, but we have endangered species at risk here." Olivia gathered Ellie into her arms, holding her close as the helicopter made another pass, this one even lower over the clearing. At the den entrance, Hope stood protectively in front of her cubs, her massive body tense as she assessed this new airborne threat. "What do they want?" Michael demanded, his protective instincts on high alert. "Is it the bears they're after, or—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't voice the fear that perhaps their daughter's unique abilities had made her a target as well. Daniel's expression was grim. "I don't know, but we need to get everyone to safety right now. There's an underground research facility about a mile from here, a reinforced bunker we use during severe weather. We should—" He was cut off by a new sound. Vehicles approaching rapidly on the service road that led to the research station. Through the trees, they caught glimpses of black SUVs moving with purpose, too fast for the rutted forest roads, heedless of the damage they might be causing to the protected environment. Jeremy's radio crackled to life. "Hayes, this is Perimeter Team 1. We've got at least 3 vehicles breaching the southeast access point. Armed individuals, military-style gear. They're not responding to hails." "Get the bears out of here," Ellie said suddenly, her voice oddly clear and commanding. Everyone turned to stare at the toddler, who continued with unsettling certainty. Hidden place, under the fallen tree, by the water. Daniel's eyes widened. "The old hibernation den," he whispered, "from last winter. It's abandoned now, but—" He looked at Ellie with newfound wonder. "How could you possibly know about that?" The child just pointed toward the clearing, where Hope was already moving. guiding her cubs not toward the main den as expected, but toward the forest edge in the exact direction Ellie had indicated. "Incredible!" Dr. Vasquez breathed. "It's as if they're communicating in real time." Outside, the helicopter made a final pass and then veered off, apparently having spotted the bear family. Hope increased her pace, her cubs struggling to keep up as she led them toward the denser part of the forest. Michael made a quick decision. "We need to create a distraction. Give Hope time to get the cubs to safety." He looked around the research blind, assessing their options. "Do you have flares? Anything to draw attention away from their escape route?" Jeremy nodded, already moving to a storage locker. "Emergency kit has signal flares and smoke markers." "Good. We'll set them off on the opposite side of the clearing," Michael said, taking charge of the situation with the calm efficiency of a man who had faced crises before. "Daniel, you know these woods better than anyone. You need to guide the Vasquez team to this underground facility you mentioned, get the research data secured." He turned to Olivia, his expression softening as he looked at his wife and daughter. "Liv, you and Ellie need to go with them. Get to safety. I'll catch up once I've set the diversion." "No," Olivia said firmly, surprising everyone with her resolve. "We're not splitting up. Ellie's involved in this whether we like it or not. Those bears, Hope and Miracle especially, they're connected to her somehow. If we separate them completely, who knows what might happen?" "She's right, Doctor," Vasquez said, surprising herself with this non-scientific conclusion. "There's something happening here that transcends our understanding. We need to keep Ellie close to the bears, not just for her sake, but for theirs." Michael looked torn, his desire to protect his family warring with the growing realization that they were part of something larger than themselves. "Trust," Ellie said simply, reaching up to touch her father's worried face. "Trust Hope." It was this small gesture from his daughter that finally decided him. Michael nodded once, accepting the strange new reality they had found themselves in. "All right," he said. "We stay together, but we move fast and we stay hidden. If these people are after the bears or after Ellie's connection to them, we need to make sure they find neither." Outside, the vehicles had reached the research perimeter. They could hear doors slamming, voices calling out orders, the unmistakable sound of weapons being readied. Whoever these intruders were, they came prepared for resistance. Daniel was rapidly gathering essential equipment. The old service tunnel leads directly to the underground facility. It comes out near the original hibernation den, exactly where Hope seems to be heading. He looked at Ellie with renewed wonder, almost as if she knows we'll be following. Dr. Vasquez had made her decision as well. "Jeremy, initiate data purge protocols. Anything we can't take with us gets wiped. I don't want these people getting their hands on what we've discovered." As the small group prepared for their escape, Ellie remained calm, almost preternaturally so for a child her age. She watched the activity with serious eyes, occasionally glancing toward the clearing where Hope and her cubs had disappeared into the forest. "They waiting," she said softly to no one in particular. "In the special place. For us." Olivia knelt beside her daughter, struck by the strange maturity in her eyes. "Ellie, sweetheart, how do you know these things? How are you talking to Hope?" Ellie considered the question with a thoughtfulness no toddler should possess. "Not talking," she tried to explain. "Feeling, like music without sounds." She frowned, frustrated by the limitations of her vocabulary. "In here." She tapped her chest. "And here." She touched her forehead. Before Olivia could probe further, the first of the intruders reached the clearing. Through the observation window, they watched as men in tactical gear spread out in a search pattern, communicating via hand signals. Their movements were disciplined, professional, not poachers or random threats, but a trained team with a specific objective. "We've got about 3 minutes before they reach the blind," Daniel whispered, finishing his hasty packing. "The service tunnel entrance is concealed behind the equipment shed. If we time it right, we can slip out while they're focused on the main research area." Michael nodded grimly. "I'll take point. Olivia and Ellie stay in the middle with Dr. Vasquez. Daniel and Jeremy cover our rear. Everyone clear?" The group nodded, the gravity of the situation evident on their faces. What had begun as a promising day of scientific observation had rapidly devolved into something resembling a military operation. As they prepared to make their move, Ellie suddenly went still, her head tilted as if listening to a distant sound only she could hear. A slow smile spread across her face. "Hope says hurry," she whispered. "Hidden place ready, but bad men have machines that smell." "Tracking dogs?" Daniel guessed. Ellie shook her head. "Number metal things. Find warm bodies." "Thermal imaging," Dr. Vasquez realized with alarm. "If they have military-grade equipment, then we need to move now," Michael finished, his voice brooking no argument. "Everyone ready?" "On my mark." The intruders had reached the main research tent, their attention momentarily focused on the computers and equipment there. It was their window of opportunity, perhaps their only one. "Now," Michael whispered, and he led them out the blind's rear exit, into the dappled shadows of the forest, and toward an uncertain future where science, nature, and something perhaps even more mysterious were converging in ways none of them could fully comprehend. Behind them, the first shouts of discovery arose as the intruders realized the research station was empty. Its data wiped, its occupants vanished like shadows in the deepening woods. And somewhere ahead, guided by an impossible connection between a toddler and a wild bear, lay sanctuary. Temporary, perhaps, but sanctuary nonetheless.